We always attach ceilings before the walls, so that's what I'm going to show you first. Usually, you'll have simpler framing than in this room, where the ceiling joists are running in two directions. We'll account for this change in direction when we position the first panel. But in the normal situation, with all the joists running parallel, you'll just start the first ceiling panel right up against the wall.
154 and a half.
154 and a half, which is a 13 feet. And now I'm going to get the measurements so we can place on this ceiling joist here, which is 54 1/4 inches. Okay, our panel has to splice on this ceiling joist, which is 6 1/4 inches over 48 inches away from the wall. So I'm going to measure 6 1/4 inches over here and put a mark there, and then I'll go on the other end and put a mark 6 1/4 inches. And this will be where we start our first panel, so that it'll splice on the center of that ceiling joist. In order to make it easier to get the panel exactly where we want it, we put a nail and we just butt our sheet to that. Jeff and Ira marked the length of the panel, about 1/4 inch shorter than the actual length they measured at the ceiling, in order to get a slightly loose fit that will protect the edges when the panel is raised. Then they use a 4-foot T-square as a guide for the utility knife. Cut through the paper layer along the square's edge. Snap the panel back away from the cut, and then cut the paper face on the other side right in the crease. It doesn't matter which side is scored with the knife first. The guys position the panel by lifting one end into place while they keep the other end low, which keeps the ends from binding as the panel is squared up. Jeff, in the red shirt, is making sure his end is square against the wall, while Ira lifts his end up. Make the spaces between the ends of the panel and the wall even before you start to attach the panel. Jeff and Ira put enough nails into the edge of the panel to tack it in place, so that I can screw the remaining edges and the center. Screws are stronger and less likely to pop loose than nails, so I always use screws across the whole center of the panel. Drywall manufacturers recommend 12-inch spacing between fasteners along each framing member on the ceiling and 16-inch spacing on the wall. The guys are measuring the next panel, which needs a corner cut out to fit around the closet.
Oh, I wanted an 8. Yeah, 1 and...
While the guys cut the next panel, I locate the ceiling electrical box by measuring from 2 known points and writing those measurements close to the point that I measured from. Ira scores the face paper horizontally to begin the cutout for the closet. Then he pencils a line for the saw cut. He has to use a drywall utility saw instead of the knife for this next cut, because he has to go all the way through the panel now, so that he'll be able to cut it completely free with the knife. Meanwhile, Jeff is cutting the panel to length. And once he gets his utility knife back, the guys carry the board in, using a low carry for maneuverability and because the panel should start in a low position for placement. Once again, maneuver the panel into place by starting with one end high and square to the wall and the other end low. Even up the end spacing.
You good?
This panel covers an electrical box, which we'll need to cut out, so for now we just tack it into place. There's no real option to a screw gun with a magnetic screw tip for this job. These drywall screws are designed to go into wood. For metal studs, the threads have a finer pitch. Don't mix them up. Get screws long enough to go 5/8 of an inch into wood framing. The gun adjusts so that the screw's head ends up just below the paper surface, without tearing the surface or damaging the gypsum core. I use the measurements on the panel and on the wall to mark the location of the center of the electrical box. Now I use an electric drywall router to cut out around the outside of the box. Push the bit through the drywall at the mark and out until the bit hits the edge of the box. Then withdraw the router, hop over the edge of the box, and cut. Too much pressure against the edge of the box will sometimes break the bit. I always have some extra bits handy. After a quick replacement, I'm back in business. The bit has a pilot end that rides the outside of the box without cutting into it. The proper direction to move is counterclockwise, looking up at the router. For a long, straight cut, Ira holds the tape in his left hand with his forefinger as they stop against the panel edge. He cuts with a knife in the right hand, the blade held against the hook end of the tape. Keep the tape perpendicular to the panel edge. Jeff marks and cuts the length. With the panel on edge, the guys snap away from the scored side and cut in the crease. The end is trimmed off and the narrow strip goes up into place. We use an adjustable step-up bench, also called a trestle, when hanging ceilings 9 feet or lower. Now we hang the steeply pitched ceiling in the bedroom. The ceiling has been furred up to provide solid nailing over the rigid insulation. Since the ceiling is more than 16 feet wide, we'll have to use 2 panels for each row. This means we'll have butted end seams on the ceiling. These seams are staggered as we stack the panels up the ceiling. 135.5. When hanging the pitched ceilings, it's easier to start at the bottom. Once the first row is attached, the other rows are put into place. The bottom edge rests against the lower row of drywall as it's nailed and screwed into place. If these panels were attached from the top down, they'd have to be held up into place, which is more difficult.
Yep, good.
I've got to place an extra bit of furring here to support the narrow section of drywall that will fill this corner.